Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois. It is Thursday, February 20th. This week in the news, part 2 of our discussion about the year's top 10 educational stories from 2019 by Michael Nietzel of Forbes. Our book chapter will discuss the CSS PROFILE. And our question is Dave from Westwood, Massachusetts, and he wants to know how much emphasis should we put on graduation rates when selecting a college. Our interview will be part 2 of a 4-part series Mark is doing with financial expert Mark Kantrowitz on the subject of how and when should you appeal for more money if your financial aid award doesn't meet your needs. And the college spotlight will go to Oklahoma and look at the University of Oklahoma.
Anika's back! All your fans missed you. All the emails we got. Where's Anika? I love Dave, but where's Anika?
We love you, Dave.
my favorite one was, Dave is great. I can tell you have good chemistry. You know each other. I like his voice, but I miss Anika's sassiness.
Oh, well, listening family, thank you so much for all the great messages. I missed it as well, even in this short period of time. It hasn't been long, but so my mom is in a very serious health condition, and we just don't know when or for how long I may have to be away again. So for a while, I won't be able to do every great segment of the show. But however, Mark and I thought this would be a great time to introduce a new format. Wait, first of all, let me give a shout out to Dave Williams. Great job. Oh, my goodness. I don't think there's anyone better that could have filled in on our anniversary episode. Oh, my God, I can't believe I missed it. But I was like, okay, sounds like Dave is a natural. Okay. And look, most importantly, he was able to bring out DJ Mark Stucker playing Tony Tony's.
You heard Tony? You heard that?
Lord. When the mamas are away.
At least I didn't try to sing it. Remember, I learned my lesson on that.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that.
Let Tony do the anniversary song, not my voice.
Well, listen, when the mamas are away, the dads will play music in the background. Oh, my goodness.
Yes. Yeah, you might have vetoed me if you were on that one.
Well, listen, big shout out to you again, Mark and Dave and the listening family. Thank you all so much. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to see how this goes. And we think this is going to work nicely, actually fantastically, if that's a word. So I'm going to record every week the chapter segment of the show along with the weekly question from a listener with Mark, of course. And then Dave and Mark are going to tackle everything else. And Mark, I have to say, I love hearing from a dad. So I believe this is just going to be an awesome mix. And by the way, Dave, I do accept your challenge to up our game in listeners in North Carolina and Illinois.
Yeah, and a couple things I think it's going to be great too. You hear from mom, hear from a dad, still do an interview. A couple of things I'll say. One is we're still keeping our same order. So right. While it's true that Anika's she'll do the chapter section and she'll do the question from the listener, we'll still continue to go with our order of in the news. So we'll start out basically with Dave. Then Anika will have sections 2 and 3, book chapter, question from the listener. And then we'll have the interview, section 4. And then our 5th section will be the college spotlight with Dave. And it makes sense for Dave to do that because he badgered the heck out of me to implement that. It was his idea.
Good for you, Dave.
But one other thing I want to say, one thing that's great about Dave, it's like, I'm like, Dave, thank you so much for being a designated hitter, substitute hitter, pitching in for Anika in her time of distress. And he's like, are you kidding me? I love this stuff. I can't get enough of it. So it's nice to know that he's bringing that passion and joy. And I don't feel like I'm like twisting his arm.
All right.
One more thing about our new format. It will go into effect next week in 109. So Anika's back from her out-of-state travels, but now she's swamped with work. So we're going to let her get caught up on her work. Thanks, Dave, one more time for going solo for this episode. Beginning next week, 109, you'll see our new format. 2 segments for Dave, 2 segments for Anika.
All right. So it's going to be a good ride. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, and listeners, we really value your feedback. So please send us your candid emails. They are extremely helpful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Questions at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Let us know what you think about our format. You might want to give it a couple weeks to see, because we may be a little rusty first, but
give it some time.
Give it a little time, and then give us your feedback.
That's right.
Okay, friends, we have a couple announcements. First of all, Dave, now my head is spinning because I'm like, did I do this with Anika? Did I do it with Dave? Did I do it with Anika? Did I do it with Dave? Was it with you when we announced how Caltech dropped the subject test requirement for this?
I think that was with Anika. Okay, I remember that.
You listen to every episode, so I know you heard it.
I heard it. So, that's right. I was on board. I was listening.
Yeah, so very, very recently, Caltech dropped the subject test requirement. And at the time we said there are literally only 2 schools left now, Harvey Mudd and MIT. Yeah, and within 4 days of that announcement, Harvey Mudd said, we're dropping the test. So you may recall, we predicted with Harvey Mudd being in California and Caltech being the more well-known internationally of the 2, it would just be too much pressure because those 2 schools overlap a lot. There's no way they could sustain that, the barrage of questions that they were, coming their way. And they saw the writing on the wall really quickly. In fairness, chances are they were probably already having very, very serious internal discussions and may have been really close to making the decision anyway. And Caltech just scooped them first. But that's a pretty big announcement. We're literally down only to MIT as the only school in the country. I do need to check. University of Puerto Rico did require as well, but I'm not 100% sure that they dropped the requirement. So I believe it's just MIT. I'll do some double checking on that University of Puerto Rico, but I can't imagine, given what happened to that island, that they're holding out on that requirement. Any thoughts?
Yes, that doesn't surprise me. As you know, Mark, my daughter did a fly-in program to Harvey Mudd where she was able to spend a week there and take some classes and a seminar and get enrolled in some computer courses. A very, very nice institution.
Yeah. And another announcement we have is many of you may know this depending if you hear every episode, but if you don't, we've made some massive changes on our website. And so we just really encourage every one of our listeners to go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, because you're going to see every recommended resource we've had all the way from the start. We've categorized them by all of the books versus all of the websites. And we have hyperlinks to take you right to the book if you want to make a purchase and right to the website. We also have all of our college spotlights up and they're categorized now. Our interviews, it's not new news. We did that back on episode 100, but the website is just so much better than it used to be. And so if you've never visited yourcollegeboundkid.com, or if you visited, but you haven't been there since we put all our college spotlights up, all our recommended resources and all our interviews, strongly encourage you to take 10 to 20 minutes and peruse our website. And also remember, I've asked a favor of our listeners. If you could please go back to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the interview tab, and any interviews that you particularly liked, if you could just make a little comment there. Because what I'm going to do at the end of March is I'm going to forward all of the comments to the interviewees. And I know that this is going to lift them up because in the past, I would sometimes say, hey, we got this great email from a listener in Wisconsin. Here's what they said. And multiple times someone said, Mark, you made my day. And so it's a tough job. And so I want to encourage all of our interviewees. And so I'm asking for you guys to do that. I'd really appreciate it if you could just take a few minutes. Want you to be totally genuine. Go back. You'll see we've had 46 interviews so far. Pick your favorites and just put a little comment in there, and we'll make sure that the interviewees get to see your comment. And Dave, wouldn't that be weird? You're on there. What if you get comments now?
Yes, I would. And yeah, Mark, I just want to reiterate what a fantastic job you guys have done on the website and what a great resource it is building. It's almost like the Wikipedia of college admissions. I find myself now in conversations referencing previous podcasts or previous interviewees. And I think the college spotlight, especially, where you can talk to people and say, go to this episode or go to this spotlight, and it's right there at your fingertips, getting all the critical information that you need. So just really want to encourage folks to check out the website, check out those resources. As this podcast matures and builds, it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful resource going forward.
Thanks, Dave. So let's transition. So today for our admissions tip. And the admissions tip is when you go to the admissions officer section of every website, which is something you should always do. You should familiarize yourself with the Meet the Staff section of all of the colleges that you are looking at applying to. If they list a phone number on the site under the admission officer, that's usually a sign, hey, you can pick up the phone and call them. If they list an email, that's a sign that they welcome your emails. You're not bothering them, because when they don't want you to email them or they don't want you to call them, they don't put their email and they don't put their phone number up. Now, obviously, you don't need to stalk them and badger them, but that's just a little tip. If you're trying to figure out, gee, can I call an admissions officer or can I email them? Go to the Meet the Staff section and see if they list their phone number, see if they list their website. And in future episodes, we'll talk about things like how often you should contact them, what makes an appropriate contact, what makes a contact sort of a judicious contact that maybe is in your best interest versus a bothersome contact. But we'll deal with that in future episodes. And for our admissions vernacular, our word of the day is draw rate. Draw rate. And this is a little inside baseball, but draw rate is a term some admissions officers use. Don't hear it that much. I tend to hear more financial aid people use it. And it's just a fancy word for yield, which we've explained to you before. Yield drives the bus in admissions. You got to get the number right. You got to know how many people are actually coming of all these admits. So yield, once again, is the percentage of people that accept your offer. If you admit 100, do 50 come, do 80 come, or do 10 come? So if 10% come, and some schools literally only get 10 out of every 100 admits, then they have a 10% draw rate. So draw rate, a euphemism for yield.
Yeah,
and I think Dave.
Yield is one of those crazy parameters that just went totally nuts after it was added to the rankings like U.S. News and World Report. I think when I was going to college, no one really focused on yield. But since yield became one of those parameters to move you up the rankings, everybody got crazy about the yield. Is that correct, Mark?
No, actually it's not. So yield has always been extremely important because you can't do admissions without it. Because think about it, your goal, you have to be able to get that number right for how many people, like you've got beds to fill, right? You've got a budget that is dependent on number of students that come. And if you over enroll, where do you put the kids? And if you under enroll, how do you pay your bills? So yield has always been extremely important in the admission process. It's just one of those things that happens behind the scenes that the average person doesn't think anything about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
So this originally we were going to blow through all 1001 episode, but Dave and I, I'm a talker, Dave's a talker. That ain't happening. So we pulled an audible midway. You didn't hear this because we're editing it out of the final version. We said, Dave, we got to do a part 1 and we got to do a part 2. And so now we're entering into part 2. Dave, take it away. Number 6.
Number 6, the year of the mega gift. In 2019, a record number of donations of $100 million or more were made to American colleges, making that figure the new threshold for mega gifts. A $1 billion gift was split between 4 research institutions receiving $261 million each, resulting from the sale of the Lord Corporation. The W.P. Carey Foundation made a $125 million gift to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, believed to be the largest private gift ever to a college of law. Other large donations included a $100 million gift for scholarships at the University of Virginia, a $150 million contribution to the University of Utah for the study and treatment of mental illness, a $750 million gift to the California Institute of Technology to study climate change, and $100 million for engineering to UCLA. Well, all I can say is, Lori Laughlin, you better up your game. That's amazing, but certainly not surprising. What's your thoughts, Mark?
Well, we never did a podcast on this. I think it's one of these things where, when you look at it in its totality, there are a lot of big gifts, but each time an individual gift gets given, it's not necessarily enough to warrant us doing a whole episode on it. But the one thing I do want to comment on, it's not in here. And the reason I understand it's not in here is because they're focusing strictly on 2019. But what happened in November of 2018, we mentioned, which was substantial. And that is that Michael Bloomberg, yes, that's presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg, gave the biggest gift, not in school history. He's a Johns Hopkins alum, so he gave the money back to Johns Hopkins. But it was the biggest gift in higher educational history, as he gave Johns Hopkins $1.8 billion with a B, $1.8 billion for scholarships for low-income students. And I had the opportunity when I was at the College Board Conference in October to have lunch with two members of Johns Hopkins financial aid team. And needless to say, that gift has been a complete and total game changer. By the way, talking about a guy with money.
Yeah, wow.
I just heard he upped his staff from one time. I'll get political for a sec. I heard after the results of Iowa caucus came back, he'd already spent almost $300 million on advertising. He said doubling it, and he had 1,000 field officers, he was paying in Missouri and all kind of places. And he said, I'm doubling that. We're going to 2,000. Yeah. Let's see an opening. But anyway, those are some deep pockets. But yeah, so one thing that is encouraging is, and this kind of goes back to 2010, August of 2010, 40 of the wealthiest Americans, these are all billionaires, they all joined together. And this was an initiative that is really spearheaded by both Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett. And they made this commitment to give the majority of their wealth to addressing some of society's most pressing problems. Yeah. And so they called it the Giving Pledge. And there was a series of conversations with a bunch of philanthropists about how they could collectively set a new standard of generosity amongst the ultra wealthy. And I think this is one of the most powerful things, that happened. And so just a simple pledge, the Giving Pledge. And by the way, Tom Steyer is one of the ones that's taken this Giving Pledge as well, and saying that instead of just getting, my third yacht or my second private plane or my 8th Tesla or whatever, I'm going to set an example to make the world a better place. And so I can't say for sure that these individual big gifts that came were stimulated or the impetus was the Giving Pledge. But I do think that in a world where we get a lot of negative news, I think this Giving Pledge was one of the things that totally inspired me personally.
Yes, and I was actually going to ask the question, Mark. I believe that New York University Medical School is now tuition free because of the major gift of a donor, but the donor has escaped my thoughts right now. Do you know who that was?
I can't remember who it was, but it is true. And some other universities are looking at doing that. Yeah. I want to say it was it was either $450 million gift or they'd raised $450 million so far.
Right.
So, yeah. And so it's nice to see with all the negativity out here a positive story. And that is that. And also, I think this is important for, the rich do get beat up a lot. And I think sometimes people need to realize there are a lot of people that use their resources to help society. And I think that needs to be celebrated when they do it. And this was a big story.
That's right. And the last thing I'll point out is when Robert Johnson, the former chairman of BET, Black Entertainment Television, went to one of the HBCU's graduation and offered to pay all the tuition or debt of its students. I think that happened this year or last year, but that was pretty neat. So,
Dave, that wasn't Robert Johnson. Robert Smith, Dave. Robert Smith. It was Robert Smith.
What would I say? That's right.
Yeah, you were thinking about BET and all this stuff, man. Get your mind off that entertainment. So you want to go watch a rap video or something?
That's right, Robert Smith.
Yeah, so he gave, it was actually $34 million that he gave.
Yeah.
Because he included parent loans, not just student debt. So it was kind of incredible. And a couple people have gotten up and done graduation speeches after that and said, guess what? I'm not billionaire Robert Smith. So don't expect me to announce at the end of my speech that I'm canceling all of student loans and the Parent Plus loans. And of course, you know, the previous generations were so jealous. I graduated last year. Does it apply to me? You know?
Wow. I can remember when I graduated, we had Dr. Ruth Westheimer. She didn't give us any money, but she did hand out free condoms. But that's another story.
Where are you going with this thing, Dan? Let's get back to point number 7.
Wait, did you remember Dr. Ruth? You know Dr. Ruth Westheimer? You know?
Oh, that's Dr. Ruth. I didn't know that was the last name. I didn't know that was the last name. I just know it was Dr. Ruth. Interesting.
Dr. Ruth, man.
Was this Princeton's graduation or Harvard Med?
This was Princeton's graduation, and she gave us a little speech on safe sex, and she handed out free condoms. Wow. Anyways,
that's something for you to remember. You're not going to forget that.
That's right.
All right, let's get the train. Yeah. Let's get the train back on the track, man.
That's right.
What are we up to? Point number 8? 7?
We are defunding the University of Alaska. Higher education officials closely watched the saga of the University of Alaska as Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy vacillated between budget cuts that were either draconian or merely awful. His final plan reversed his first proposal to slash the university's budget by $135 million in fiscal year 2020 and settled on an agreement with university leaders to pare the reduction to a $70 million cut spread out over 3 years. The deal avoided the immediate budget crisis that led the university to declare a financial exigency and face a possible loss of accreditation. Staff reductions, program closures, and potential campus consolidation still remain on the horizon as the institution absorbs a 21% cut in state support. Alaska emerged as a national symbol for the defunding of public higher education, a threat that many see lurking under the wings of other conservative governors and legislators. You actually touched on this on a prior podcast where you talked about the differential support that many state universities are receiving. Some have received quite significant budget cuts, leading to a significant higher expected financial contribution from the students. Is that not correct, Mark?
Yeah. We went through the states with the biggest slashes. Like, for example, Arizona, it was insane how much they slashed money from their public coffers. We talked also about Missouri and with governor, what he tried to do. And more importantly, this is just a trend. And the trend has been to see, particularly with conservative governments, to see education as big government. And therefore to slash it in the budget for tax cuts. And therefore, basically, it's one of the reasons why the cost of college is so high and there's a lot of student debt, because it's a 40-year trend now where the cost of college has been passed on to the students and to the parents. And so as these public expenditures, get slashed more and more and more, and leaving it up to you as an individual to fund your own college.
And, I think it ties back a little bit into the point we talked about last week when we talked about the widening partisan divide and views of higher education. And unfortunately, I think you see a geographic distribution in that many states that are more northeast or more liberal have a higher support for colleges financially than some of the states in other areas of the country. Would you agree, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep it moving.
Okay, good. All right. College affordability and free college programs. Soaring student debt and increasing costs of college pushed the topic of how to pay for college to center stage. The debate has been joined intensely by several Democratic contenders for the presidency. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have proposed the most aggressive plans that provide massive student debt relief and free tuition at public colleges. Pete Buttigieg, Joe Biden, and Amy Klobuchar have steered to the middle of the road, offering targeted debt relief only to those judged to have the most need, means-tested eligibility for free college, or paying for only 2 years of community college. Meanwhile, free college programs of various forms are sprouting up in local communities and at the state level, with New Mexico recently joining the movement, now involving more than 20 states to guarantee full tuition coverage for residents.
Yeah, we recently did a podcast on this, how 20 states now have some version of free college. Usually it's community college free, but there's other programs like the Seltzer in New York and other programs as well that extend toward four-year public institutions.
Yeah.
Some of them have various arrangements, like you need to stay in state for a while after you graduate and work in the state. And there's one way of trying to incentivize states that are losing populations to stay in state and not leave the state. So there are a number of creative things out there, but whether people like it or not, I've talked with Dave about this. I understand why people run for president, because all this really flowed out of Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. And even that he didn't win, even that he never even got the Democratic nomination, he changed the dialogue. And of course, it's coming into the context we've already talked about a cost of college and debt and government slashing their investment and passing costs on to kids. So, finally the pendulum is swinging. You're getting this backlash. People can debate back and forth if they think this is a good thing or think this is a bad thing. But people have had it with the cost of college. And this is one of the new creative developments. And this is really not just, to me, a 2019 story. This is really probably almost a 17, 18, and 19 story. I would say this is more of a 3-year story.
Yes, that's correct. And, keeping in mind that many European countries, such as Germany, already have free college education, and many others, including Canada, have far lower costs of college. So the United States is sort of an outlier in the cost of its colleges as compared to its other country peers.
Yeah, not sort of an outlier. I mean, there's no other country where it's $80,000 to go to the most expensive private schools, and even $50,000. There's no country where it's $50,000 to go to. I think I've seen a few that are 40, and not even 40 is extremely rare.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's keep it moving.
Great. And the rise of employer-provided education benefits. Employers are increasingly offering education assistance benefits to their employees, and many of these packages pay for all or most costs of a college education. More than 60% of U.S. companies offer financial assistance to employees for their education. Companies like Starbucks, Taco Bell, Disney, Cigna, Walmart, and McDonald's announced or expanded their educational benefits, leading a movement of what is becoming one of higher education's more reliable sources of revenue. Boy, I knew Starbucks had. I didn't know it was Taco Bell.
So you're about to turn your doctor job in, Dave, and get behind the cashier and make some tacos? Is that what you're telling me, man?
I'm telling my daughter I got her summer job lined up.
Girl, Taco Bell.
I got you into Taco Bell. Free burritos.
What's wrong with Walmart and McDonald's? They're on the list.
I don't know, man. I like that burrito supreme personally. But that's
hey, you're a doctor, man. You're not supposed to be eating that stuff.
I know. Just occasionally. But that is pretty cool. I mean, in a full employment market, I think that's pretty significant. And for many kids, we talked about this before. I was shocked that Starbucks is supposed to be like a premier job for college graduates or for kids coming out of high school because it gives health benefits, it gives college tuition. And
even some stock options.
That's right. And by the way, I read in the paper just last week that Taco Bell is offering some of its store managers salaries up to $100,000. So there's money in fast food, folks. So in case y'all are still undecided on your major. Okay. Going up to the next one. The NCAA. Oh, this is huge. This is huge. This is our last one, too. The last one.
Go ahead, Dave.
NCAA allows college athletes to earn endorsement sponsorship benefits. The NCAA took a timid step towards fairness when it succumbed to multiple pressures to permit college athletes to benefit from their names, images, and likenesses. After California Governor Gavin Newsom signed the Fair Pay to Play Act into law, allowing California's college athletes to earn money from endorsements and sponsorships, it was clear the NCAA had to retreat from its longstanding opposition to such benefits. Bipartisan political support from an increasing number of states forced the NCAA's hand, and its board of directors voted unanimously to permit athletes to receive benefits for NIL in a manner consistent with the collegiate model. Now the real work of implementing this change begins. And Mark, you and I have talked before that there are college athletes who images, the school could sell a T-shirt with that college athlete's image on it and make hundreds to thousands to millions of dollars, and the college athlete could not get one penny of that money. And if he did, would have his scholarship revoked.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the system is ridiculous right now. Like, I mean, any other student can work an additional job and make money. And there's prohibitions against student athletes even having additional jobs. Yeah. It's crazy. And I remember Chris Webber, who I'm not a fan of, by the way, because, of course, Michigan State, and his recruitment came down in Michigan and Michigan State. So you're not a Chris Webber fan. But I was sympathetic when he said, the moment I walked into the University of Michigan school bookstore and I saw they were selling my jersey for $65 and I wasn't getting a penny of it, I was bouncing. I was out of here. You know, I was sympathetic to that. Of course, he was involved in that scandal, for those who follow basketball really closely, where he took about multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars under the table. But I'm not justifying that. But yeah, athletes are being exploited. And I was glad that LeBron James actually attended the big kickoff about this, and he lended his political capital to support this. I'm sorry, but everybody is making money off these kids but the kids themselves, and I just think it's wrong.
And I believe Forbes, just a couple of years ago, added up the financial costs or benefits accrued to the University of Alabama from its football program, and all told, it was over $1 billion.
Definitely.
And then the other thing is that the highest price, the highest paid official in any given state is the football coach of its flagship program.
Dave, it's in some cases the football coach is paid 9 times the college president.
Right, and then Mark, you were even talking that in some. I think you talked about Alabama. It's not just the football coach; it's the training coach, it's the assistant coaches, it's the baseline recruiters. You're talking about six-figure salaries. Yep.
The weightlifting coach is getting $550.
Oh, it's ridiculous. And then the fact is, when
that's not $550, everybody. That's $550,000 a year. Yeah.
Right. And then, I mean, this is a very sore point for a lot of people who truly see this as an exploitation of the kids and the athletes. When you factor in the fact that many of these kids do not graduate, and many of them in the football programs leave with significant long-term injury. You have to ask yourself, have we not?
Hey, why don't you talk about that? Because you've talked to me before in your emergency medical practice of how many times you've seen, had athletes come in that you have to work on because of some football injury.
Well, I mean, we all know about the concussion risk. We know about the CTE, which is the long-term degenerative brain damage that occurs from multiple concussions that occurs, by the way, not just in football. I think the sport with the second highest number of concussions is female soccer, So, and then.
Bad. Female soccer is really bad. And obviously ACLs and everything too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's ties. I mean, we have a system now in the effort to get kids into professional sports, into college sports. They're training year round. They're getting overuse injuries. There are orthopedic surgeons and physical therapists that are seeing kids in their 20s with knees that you'd normally see in athletes in their 30s and 40s. And so there are real deleterious effects to many of these kids playing sports, especially the contact sports like football and hockey to a lesser extent. And I think it's a really underexplored story of how we've created almost like a gladiatorial system where we use these kids for revenue, for our entertainment on Saturdays and Sundays, without regard to their long-term health or the benefits accrued. So I think this is a step in the right direction. If you're going to pay a coach $10 million or $5 million and the trainer's $500,000 and the school is going to get $1 billion worth of benefit for a kid who may or may not graduate, then the very least is he gets to get a couple bucks off of the jersey whose image has him on it that you're selling. So we could go on this all day, but it's.
I want to say one thing. I want to say one thing. Yeah. So when I was in grad school, I remember the first day I arrived, it was just like theological school in Dallas, Texas. And one of the first people that I met was a former running back from the Detroit Lions,
right?
Who, was a grad student there. And so, of course, we had a long conversation about football and playing in the league. And I'll never forget this. He said, Mark, the rate of former NFL players that have some long-term permanent health issue, whether it's a knee or a hip, or a back, he said it's 100%.
Yep.
We all will carry something with us for the rest of our life for playing that sport. And so, so you're right. So anyway, I think we made our point.
Yeah, and I'll just say one other thing. The technology is rapidly approaching where we are going to be able to quantify the level of injury that's occurring through all these concussions. And I think it's a long-term issue, of course, like football. But let's move on.
Yeah. Listen, doctor, I got to get you off here. You're on your doctor hype, man. You'll be doctoring this up for the next hour. We got to get you on to the next topic.
All right, let's move on. I think that's the points, actually.
Yeah.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
So this is a very important chapter. This reminds me of, Mark, when we used to go to those Bible studies as a kid, and some of them would be really dry because it'd be like Ezekiel or Daniel.
Bringing back memories, Dave.
That's right. And your dad or my dad was It's important.
Dave's church was very sort of theologically sound, and it could put you to sleep sometimes, especially as a young kid. Sorry, Greenwood Chapel. Need to put you on blast.
That's right. You got to gnaw on the bone. But I think why this is such an important chapter is because it deals with money. It deals with filling out forms to get all the money that you possibly can to pay for a college education, which is so crucial. And so even though these can be tough chapters, you really got to pay attention to them, because I think nothing is more important after getting into college than to be able to pay for that college. So this chapter talks about the CSS profile, which is the College Scholarship Service Profile. And it's an in-depth assessment of your financial profile that is significantly more comprehensive than the FAFSA. It is used to allocate aid from the college resources, whereas the FAFSA is used for dispersing federal and state aid. Around 180 colleges, over 95% are private colleges, and over 100 scholarship organizations use this in-depth and at times very intrusive look at your financial picture in order to see who needs the money. Okay, so most private colleges don't require the profile, but the wealthier and more selective private schools usually do. And as of 2018, only 6 public schools among the 180 used the profile, and they were the University of Virginia, North Carolina, Michigan, William and Mary, Colorado State, and Georgia. And
Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech, correct. And some required for international and domestic students, and some just for domestic. Like the FAFSA, the profile is available on October 1st. And the points that you make in this chapter, Mark, that are very important is, number one, the profile is never a substitute for the FAFSA. It's like comparing apples and oranges. One's federal and one's institutional aid. Okay.
And the thing that's important about that also is you have to do the FAFSA for every school if you want to get federal money. So when you're looking at the profile, you're looking at doing it in addition to. It would be like, what could I say? I'm bad with illustrations, but it's like if you were getting a hamburger and you say, okay, I want tomato and I want lettuce. It doesn't mean you don't want the burger and the bun. The FAFSA is still going to be the burger and the bun, but anyway, I'll probably delete that because it was a terrible example.
Well, no, I'll add to it, man. If it's a burger, the FAFSA is the meat. You're always going to get the meat. But the profile is the cheddar cheese.
You're easier on
Yeah, by that time, she would be doing the audio eye roll.
Yeah, exactly,
we'll take a hamburger and run with it. All right, Mike. So anyway, you make the point that, as you said, everyone's going to require the FAFSA. Not everybody's going to require the profile. Another important distinction is the FAFSA is free.
And required not to apply, but required if you need financial aid.
That's correct. That's correct.
Although, if you want money, then you're going to have to submit the FAFSA. And for some schools, even for merit money, not many, but some even for merit money require the FAFSA. But go ahead. You're making a great point about 3-point. Go ahead. That's a good one.
Right. So the FAFSA is free, but the profile is $25 for the first college and $16 for each additional college that requires it. Now, what's really important is if you take the SAT and you've got a fee waiver for the SAT, you're automatically eligible for the fee waiver for the profile. Unfortunately, if you took the ACT, there is no automatic qualification when you sign up for the profile. So you have to see if you are.
Yeah, and Dave, let me explain why that's true. Yeah. The reason why that's true is because the college board runs the profile. So the college board administers the SAT, right? The college board administers something called IDOC, which we'll talk about another time. The college board administers AP exams, and the college board administers the profile. And other things, too, which we'll talk about later. CLEP is another thing, which we're going to be doing a big bonus section on CLEP. We haven't talked much about CLEP, but there are a number of things the college board administers.
Right. And then there are a number of areas where the profile assesses your needs differently from the FAFSA. For example, if you live with only one of your parents, it's only that parent's income that is included in the FAFSA. And then most schools that require the profile will require you to submit a non-custodial profile application, which is as deep a dive into your non-custodial parents' finances as the profile.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
So, Dave, let's just stop for a sec. I want to go right to the basics and ask, why would these 180, it's actually 187 last time I checked, but it can change from month to month. So maybe it's 188 now, 186, but last time I checked it was 187. Why would these 187 schools and a bunch of scholarship organizations as well, why would they require the profile when that's only about 6% of all colleges? So why do you think they require it and most and the other 94% do not?
I'm going to guess it has to do something with how many schools are need blind in terms of the extent of the aid they give. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, it's not that. What it has to do with so the FAFSA is all about federal money. It's money from the Department of Education. It's the Pell Grant program. It's FSCOG program. It's the Federal Direct Student Loan Program. And it's a work study. All right, it's all about federal money. And the FAFSA formula, quite honestly, is not that accurate, to be really honest. There's lots of loopholes in it. The profile is what schools use to decide how much of their own money they're going to give away. All right? And their own institutional money, whether it's need-based aid or merit-based aid, is their money. It's not the government's money. And so because the FAFSA has so many loopholes in it, and because schools work really, really hard to build up their money, just doesn't come overnight. You're talking at times about more than 200 and 300 years of building up endowments. Okay. And there's some schools, a few of them, about 3 that were founded in the 1600s. So in those cases, we're talking about like the 350 years. So they've worked extremely hard to build up their money, and they want to make sure that it goes to the right people, the people that they feel qualify for. So that's why they've come up with this much more intrusive, but much more accurate way of assessing money. In fact, literally, the profile, it would be like putting together a team of talented accountants and saying, what is every single loophole that people use to get around hiding their money? How can we block it? And the profile does that because it makes you ask every imaginable question to give a complete and total accurate picture of your finances. And the reason why you have only these 187 is because these are schools that have a lot of money. So they have a lot of money. Right. So they're definitely in their best interest to figure out who really should qualify for this money. What happens for most of the other 94% of schools is that they don't have enough money to give a family what they qualify for. So for them, the FAFSA works fine. It's more general. We're not promising any way to meet your financial needs. You just don't have enough money to do it. So I just want people, if the people only remember one thing, I want them to understand that, because I know we're getting into the weeds on the details, but that's the core of what I want people to understand is these are the wealthiest schools, and therefore they want to use the most accurate way of allocating the money.
Well, yes, that's a good way to segue into the last part of the chapter where it says how to complete the profile. And it talks about the profile worksheet, in which you'll need about 5 major things, which is your tax returns, your bank accounts, your social security number, your business and farm records, and your housing information. And because the financial information required is so comprehensive, you make the point that, quote, there is no way in the world a student should do this without a parent. And having parent involvement is pretty much mandatory to fill out an accurate profile.
Yeah, and the other thing that I really want to point out, Dave, I mentioned this toward the end of the chapter, is when you fill out the FAFSA, you get an expected family contribution or an EFC, and it's a standard number. They send it to you right away usually within minutes after completing the FAFSA. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but longer, maybe 1 day, 2 days, and that's really rare these days. And it's a standard, and you can say, okay, this is what my EFC is, which is a standard protocol and formula that the Department of Education uses looking at income and assets of the student and parent, and to come up with your EFC. With the profile schools, they actually have their own EFC, but you won't find out. There's no way of you finding out exactly what that is, because there's not really a standard protocol, because they're literally picking and choosing amongst over 300 different things. That's why I refer to it as a smorgasbord. What's the big smorgasbord in Chicago, Dave? What do you got there?
Oh, man. I don't think we have any smorgasbords.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So you pick and choose the things that you want off of the smorgasbord. Your Frida may pick something different than you. Lauren, your daughter, may pick something different than you. That's how a smorgasbord works, and that's how the profile works. There are over 300 different items that a school can pick and choose to apply, and it's very customized based on their policies. So it does generate an EFC, but it's not something that you're going to receive, and it's not going to be sent to you, and it's not going to be the same from school to school. It's going to differ from school to school based on which items off the smorgasbord the school picks. Those are the big things I want people to come away with as their takeaways. Anything else you want to share in the chapter, or do you want to move on?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. Once again, it's a tough chapter in terms of the information, but such a vital one because it's all about that money.
Yeah, and once again, if you're not applying for financial aid, this won't apply to you. If you are applying to financial aid, but you're applying to one of the 94% of schools that don't require the profile, it won't apply to you. But the majority of selective schools require it. And if you notice, those 6 public schools that Dave mentioned, okay, when you're talking about the Georgia Techs and the North Carolina Chapel Hills and the UVAs and the Michigans, there's a couple things they have in common. They are selective, and they also tend to have a lot more resources. And so that's why you get it for them. All right, let's keep it moving. We are on to our question from a listener.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
And our question is from Dave from Westwood, Massachusetts. And he wants to know, how much emphasis should we put on graduation rates when selecting a college?
So this is a fantastic question. And Dave, Daves are taking over my life. You know, you got Dave from Massachusetts, Dave from Chicago. So, and our audio engineer is Dave Visaya. So he's the one who's going to take all this and make the magic happen with all of this hodgepodge of info. So 3 Daves in this podcast, but this is a great question. Dave, thank you for your patience. Dave sent this in a long time ago. One of the things I don't know how to figure out about our format, Dave, is we get backlogged on our questions. Like, we've got a backlog now of about 25 questions, and I guess it just is what it is, because, we take one, and we decided to go with this format of do one in-depth question per episode. So Dave must have sent this in about a half a year ago. But it's a great, great, great question. So let's talk about this. So the answer is graduation rates, I think, can be very important, but I also think that they're misread and misunderstood by the population at large. And the way I look at graduation rates is, let's talk about why people don't graduate. Okay? And what the research shows on why they don't graduate. And basically, there are 3 big buckets that can explain why people don't graduate. Number 1 is the caliber of the student. So students come into college with a 4.0 high school GPA, they graduate at twice the rate of students with a 3.0 graduation rate. Any thoughts on why that would be true, Dave?
Oh, college preparation. You have mentioned in the past that the best predictor of college success are not standardized test scores, but your performance in your high school as reflected in your grades. So this is a direct correlation from that.
Yeah, and if you think about it, so in high school, think of all the built-in accountability metrics that are in place. Okay, you've got attendance that gets sent home to your parents. You've got grades, you've got quizzes, you have parent-teacher conferences. And so there's a lot of built-in accountability metrics that can get you to do what you're supposed to do. In college, it's a complete and total free-for-all. Parents aren't seeing attendance records. Sure, there's still quizzes and tests and things, but a lot of times those aren't going through to parents at all unless, one, you set it up internally to allow your parents to have access to your portal. So college requires a lot more discipline. You've got all this free time. In high school, you have a very structured day, typical sort of 8 to 3 day. You go class to class. College, you may have no classes at all on a Tuesday or Thursday. So, and then not only that, college got every imaginable club, activity, party every night, distraction. And so some students can block all those distractions out because they're extremely self-motivated, they're self-disciplined, which is reflected usually in their high school GPA, as Dave points out. And so the research indicates that students with high GPAs graduate at an exponentially higher rate than students with low GPAs. And the second big factor that impacts graduation rates is the finances of the school. So the other major reason why you'll find that students drop out of college is over money. And there's lots and lots and lots of research on this. So if a family is getting financially gapped, in other words, what that means is that maybe they can afford to pay $30,000 for college and the school's asking them to pay $45,000. They suck it up for 1 year and say, we'll do loans or whatever. We'll apply for scholarships. And then they say, we just can't do this year 2 or year 3, and they drop out over money. And so those are by far the 2 biggest reasons that impact graduation rates, which is why when you look at the highly selective schools, they always have really, really high graduation rates. Because one, they're attracting 3.8, 3.9, 4.0 type kids, even 3.6, 3.7 kids, GPA-wise. And then they also have the money so that financially kids generally aren't dropping out over money. One, they attract a lot of families that can pay, so there's no issue with money there. And then even for those who need money, they have the most generous aid policies. So that's why when you're looking at the Dukes and the Davidsons and the Dartmouths and the Yales and the Harvards and the Stanfords and the Williamses and, we could go on, the Pomonas and Chicagos, they all have really high graduation rates because they have extremely generous they attract really high students and they have extremely generous financial aid for those. And they also attract lots of full pay families. Any thoughts on that, Dave?
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I can certainly see how kids who go to less selective colleges, particularly the community colleges, their financial situations are so precarious that the ability just to pay from semester to semester is itself the major determinant on whether they graduate. And I can also see why really the difference between an A and a B in high school points so much to internal motivation and discipline that carries over to college, and the presence or absence of those factors would also be the major determinants in whether a child graduates. And all those may not necessarily reflect the quality of the education that's being delivered to that institution.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad you brought community college up, because a lot of times I hear people just skewer community colleges for their low graduation rates. And what I think people are not looking at when they do that are several factors. One, a lot of times these are students that, not always, but a lot of times these are students that have had lower grades. So keep that in mind, that may not always be the community college's fault. It may be the student. Yeah. And so the other factor with community college students is that a lot of times they are part-time students. They're working full-time and they're non-traditional students. And so I think the criticism that low graduation rates that you see in community colleges are not necessarily a reflection of their lack of quality. And the third big factor that impacts graduation rates are the support services that the college has. So there are some schools, to look at Brown University, that everybody literally gets 4 different advisors. What type of resources are there? What is the advising ratio of advisors to students? And all the other support services that schools have, from tutoring to writing centers, and on and on and on and on and on. So those are the big 3 categories. So with that in mind, what do you think, Dave? I'll ask you how important graduation rates are, and then I'll have a couple comments. What do you think?
Well, I still think they're very, very important for a variety of reasons. Obviously, if a school has a certain amount of financial resources to support the student, if they're attracting a higher caliber of student, if they're providing better financial support, or the students are coming in with more financial support, that still all directly feeds into the quality and the strength of the institution. So, I mean, while institutions can say, well, our students aren't as strong and we don't have the financial aid and we don't have enough counselors, well, that's part of the metric that tells you basically how good and strong an institution it is. And then, of course, with the national rankings, graduation rates are important because it's part of the metric for me of return on investment. Because if kids are spending tens of thousands of dollars to attend your institution and half are not making it through, then they're getting a 0 return on their investment. And that's impacting any score, any metric that looks at whether you're a good value. So I still think they're very, very important. The reasons why kids graduate are varied and complex, but it still falls onto the institutions to address those reasons and to make those metrics more favorable if people want to see them as a good value for the students themselves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree they are definitely important. The only caveats that I would say is that if a school has a slightly lower graduation rate than you may like, and if money is not an issue for your family, and that may be because you got a great financial aid award, or it could just be because you don't really need much financial aid, either one, and you have a strong student, you should not necessarily deduce from that my kid has a 50% chance of graduating. In other words, if you give me a 3.9 student and money is not an issue, their chances of graduating are extremely high no matter where they go. And so that's just the only part that I would add to that. Sometimes I have people look at it at graduation and they see, remember, the national graduation rate is terrible for this country. 4-year graduation rate is under 50%. Yes. 4-year graduation rates. Yes. So, it would be incorrect to think, okay, if my 3.8, 3.9 student and money's not an issue for us goes to X school, then they only have a 1 in 2 chance of graduating. No, they'll graduate at over a 90% rate if they are a high GPA student when money's not an issue. So that's just the only part I would add to it. Like, they are important, but they are extremely important if you're not a high achieving kid and you have financial concerns with college. That's the only thing I would add.
Okay, friends, it is time for part 2 of my interview with financial aid and scholarship expert Mark Kantrowitz. In part 2 of my interview, I asked Mark about some common expenses such as parent student loans, elderly care, a special needs child, one parent refusing to pay their fair share, and he lets us know whether these are likely to be the basis for a successful aid award appeal. Mark also explains what the dependency override is, and he explains how a dependency override can impact your aid award. Mark discusses competitor aid award appeals. When is this likely to be successful, and when is this appeal likely to be denied? And we discuss preferential packaging and how it can impact your aid awards. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
And let's go back to a couple sort of common categories that I never mentioned, and let me know whether you think this would make a great case for appeal or not. What about if a parent had their own college debt from going to college, or let's say they'd taken out a Parent Plus loan for an older sibling, so they had some parent debt from a different sibling? Would those make good cases for appealing?
And generally not. The FAFSA focuses only on debt that is secured debt, where the debt is offsetting and is secured by a reportable asset. So, for example, if you have a margin loan on a brokerage account, the net worth of that brokerage account is reduced by the amount of debt. If you have investment real estate with a mortgage that is secured by that real estate, then you report the net worth of that real estate after subtracting the mortgage that's secured by that real estate. Now, if you happen to have used a mortgage on your principal place of residence, your family home, to buy that investment real estate, then that mortgage is not going to be offsetting the net worth of that investment real estate. You could try appealing that. I mean, most colleges won't make adjustment, but some might. Or, I mean, if you have other unusual aspects of that mortgage, I mean, it's worth bringing up. Worst that they can do is say no.
All right, let's talk about some common scenarios that I encounter. One is the parent that's taking care of an aging parent. Everything from they live at home and I've got significant expenses in our home to nursing care, anything at all about that. What can you share about that and whether or not you think that's a good reason to appeal, or you have not seen that as a good reason to appeal?
And it's a good reason to appeal because it affects your family's ability to pay, and it really isn't discretionary in nature. And the elderly parent doesn't need to live with you. I mean, they can be in a nursing home and you're paying the nursing home expenses. But there are two main ways that the colleges may make an adjustment for this. One is to reduce your income by the amount that you're spending on those dependent care costs. The other would be to add it to the cost of attendance. That's more likely when the student is a parent and has a special needs child, or just needs daycare while they're in classes and during studying time. The college may add that to the cost of attendance as opposed to having it affect the EFC. But those are the two main approaches. And remember that the financial need is the difference between the cost of attendance and the EFC. Two ways to have more aid eligibility. One is a lower EFC. The other is a higher cost of attendance. If the student already has a zero EFC, the only option for increasing the amount of aid that student can get is by increasing the cost of attendance.
Thank you for that. Now, one I encounter a lot is going back to this scenario, and this particularly pertains to CSS or profile schools, although it could actually even include the FAFSA as well, where one parent is just saying, I'm not going to contribute, or I'm not contributing my fair share. I'll give 1,000 or whatever, and they should give 20,000. Could be they only contribute a very little, or they're not willing to contribute at all. What is your experience with that? Is there any recourse, or is that really, you're just kind of toast if that's your scenario. What can you share about that?
Well, the profile schools are requiring information from both sets of parents. And if one parent is completely obstinate in not completing the form, then in some cases the schools will allow that parent's information to be excluded. And it has to be more than just the parent saying, I don't want to do it. Because remember, evaluation of aid eligibility is based on the ability to pay, not the willingness to pay. But maybe there is a history of domestic abuse in a hostile relationship that suggests that there really is no option for the custodial parent to get information or assistance from the non-custodial parent. It may be the school's going to want to see some sort of documentation. So copies of police reports, social worker reports that show domestic abuse, the fact that that parent has not paid child support for an extended period of time, and that can all support the argument that it's unreasonable to ask that parent for that information from that parent. Now, sometimes what the college financial aid administrator will do is they'll have a conversation with that non-custodial parent, and they'll be able to turn it around. For example, sometimes the non-custodial parent will be worried about the custodial parent getting access to information about their income and assets, and especially in a messy divorce, saying that may be a concern. And the college can reassure them about the privacy of their information. But in many cases, if your non-custodial parent refuses to play ball, well, the college may say that you're not going to be eligible for our institutional aid funds. That unfortunately happens quite often.
Yeah, that's been my experience. You have to really present a compelling case with a lot of evidence, because I understand from the college's perspective, that's the easiest way in the world for a parent to hide money. Just have one parent say, I'm not paying, and they can't hire a team of investigative reporters to go research every situation. So they end up just protecting themselves. But like you said, there are some exceptions in there. And one thing you mentioned is abuse. Can you talk about the difference between sort of independent and dependent student in the process and the dependency override and how that could impact aid?
Okay, so a dependency override takes a student who would normally be a dependent student and treats them as an independent student. This requires unusual circumstances, which is different than special circumstances. Unusual circumstances are rare and generally involve a dissolution of the family relationship. So, for example, if that child had no meaningful contact or support from the parent for an extended period of time, that might be considered abandonment. And we're not talking just a few months, we're talking years here. Mm-hmm. Or if there are sexual abuse against a child, where there are police reports, social worker reports, or reports of other independent third parties who have knowledge of the situation. Unfortunately, when the parents are divorced, sometimes the step-parent says, I'm not paying for this child, and I'm kicking them out once they reach the age of majority. And so that child is then on their own, maybe couch surfing or living with families of a friend, but they're in a usually very dire situation. So the colleges will review the situation carefully. They'll want as much information as possible, and that can be documents from homeless shelters, if the student is a homeless or at risk of homelessness, unaccompanied youth, copies of police reports, social worker reports, court-appointed advocates, anything that can shed light on the nature of the situation. And in general, the colleges aren't going to want to insist on the child having contact with an abusive parent, because that would be harmful to the student.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 108 is Mark Kantrowitz's most recent book. And the name of the book is How to Appeal for More College Financial Aid. And the subtitle is The Secrets to Negotiating a Better Financial Aid Offer and Getting More Financial Aid in the First Place. Now, I'm literally like a kid in a candy store when I learned that Mark has a new book coming out. So when I met with him in Atlanta at the FSA conference and he told me about this book, I've been checking regularly to see when it was released. And I've read all his books, and this book is just like his others in that Mark has a remarkable ability to have a level of depth and substance in his books while simultaneously communicating this depth in a manner that you don't have to be a financial aid expert to understand. In addition to learning the substance of my interview with Mark here in print form and with even more depth, which you'll get in the book, Mark also discusses techniques for increasing your eligibility for need-based financial aid. We will now return to my interview with the man himself, Mr. Mark Kantrowitz. Now, here's another one I encounter a lot, and that is a student applies, they get in 6 schools, the 8 awards are all over the place, and the school that they're most interested in attending does not give the best award, but another school that the school they're interested in attending deems another one of the schools that gave them a better award as a peer institution. And so it can open up possibilities for a kind of competitor appeal. Can you shed light on this and talk about this at all?
And so you can't negotiate with the colleges like playing one off against the other. And it's not like going into a car dealership where Bluff and Buster gets you a better deal. Rather, in most negotiations, professional judgment in disguise. So you have 2 different aid offers from 2 competitive institutions. It may be the case that one institution had information that the other didn't. One might be a profile school, the other not. The profile form has a question where you can mention any special circumstances, whereas the FAFSA doesn't. And so when you make the college with the inferior aid offer aware of these special circumstances, they can make an adjustment that leads to a new financial aid package that may be more competitive. And there are colleges that have said that if you've got a better aid offer from a competitor, we'll consider it. Doesn't mean that they'll make an adjustment, just that they'll consider it. And some are very explicit about who they consider to be their peer schools. And these are colleges with whom they compete for students. Whereas other colleges, if you're trying to appeal at a first-year college and you have a better aid offer from a third-tier college, and they'll say, well, enjoy going to that college, because that college may be trying to recruit you by giving you a much better aid offer, and these colleges don't get into bidding wars. But on the other hand, yes, you can provide that information to the college, and the college will consider it. And one college, Carnegie Mellon University, in the past would consider the aid offers at competing colleges, and in some cases they would match them. In other cases, they wouldn't. It's entirely up to the specific circumstances that affect the affordability of the college. And keep in mind, one college may offer you $5,000, another will offer you $10,000. But if the college that offers you $10,000 is $10,000 more expensive than the college that offers you $5,000, it may not be a better deal. So the focus is going to be on the net price of the college, not the sticker price and not the total dollar amount of financial aid.
Exactly. And listeners, net price is just what you pay after sticker price minus free money, basically, what you pay. Sticker, that's the bottom line, what you should be concerned about. I haven't checked this year, but last year, Cornell, and for a few years in a row, Cornell has had it right on their website that, listen, if another Ivy League school, and then they list some other schools, Duke and some others, assess your need different.
MIT among them.
Yep. Of course, you got to get the alma mater in there, Mark. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know about Cornell doing that, right? So they were very explicit on their website. I had a meeting a week ago with Guilford College, and they said, we want to know if somebody assesses the need differently. So this is going to be completely case by case. But if you try to go to Cornell with, even Ithaca, very good school right there, right? Or SUNY Binghamton, they're not necessarily going to deem that a peer, even if they have an amazing program in some area that may even be better than Cornell. They're the ones that will deem who a peer is, not necessarily what you may think.
Right. And each college may have a different packaging philosophy that dictates how they decide how much aid you're going to get. I'll give an example. I've changed some details to protect the identity of the student, but there was a student whose parents owned an expensive piece of real estate in New York as a family home, and there was a significant change in family income, and since that occurred, and one parent died, the other parent has lower income, and so the net worth of that real estate, which this was at a profile school, so it had an impact on the aid eligibility, was completely out of sync with the family income.
Mm-hmm.
So there were two schools, both initially were considering the net worth of the family home, and both of them were uncapped. And one of them decided that they were going to disregard the net worth of the family home because it doesn't reflect the income and therefore the ability to pay. And the other was toying around with capping it, but then ultimately decided to just still count it and not change their aid offer. And so those differences in policies, people think of the profile as one monolithic form,
mm-hmm.
when it's really almost 200 distinct formulas,
mm-hmm.
with each college customizing it to their particular philosophy. And so you may get differences in aid offers because of differences in packaging philosophies, and sometimes the colleges just won't budge. And so then you'll have to choose, is it worth paying thousands of dollars more to attend your dream school, or save a lot of money and attend your second choice school? And in fact, what I recommend that students do is not have a single dream school,
mm-hmm.
have three.
Mm-hmm.
So this pick three approach will mean that you're more likely to get into a college where it's not only one of your dream schools, but is a college that you can afford. There's an annual study called the American Freshman, comes out of UCLA's Higher Education Research Institute. And they have a question there that asks the student, are you enrolled at your first choice college, second choice, third choice, and so on? If you count the percentage of students who are enrolled at their first, second, or third choice, it's 94% of American freshmen. So there's a good chance that if you pick three dream colleges, that you will end up enrolled at one of them.
Yeah, that's great. And I will tell you, Mark, I've definitely seen schools this is my 20th year doing this, and I've definitely seen more of an increase at schools willing to match who they deem as competitors. And not everybody does it, but I think one of the myths out there, because there's so much talk about how hard it is to get into the MITs and the Cornells and the Carnegie Mellons of this world, that it's still a buyer's market out there, and schools work really, really hard to court a kid. And even some of the wealthiest schools and the most prestigious schools, I find, are still open to reevaluating an aid offer if they can see that another school assessed your need differently. Now, where it gets tricky is when you're comparing merit versus need, right? So if one school's doing a need-based analysis,
yes,
and you appeal, and another school came up with a word off a need-based analysis, that's different than if a school threw a merit aid in, and now you're trying to appeal merit versus need. Do you also experience that as well?
Yes, and in particular, and some merit aid offers are actually significantly need-based, and they'll take some money out of the need-based pool, and then they'll add a little sweetener, and it may just be a few $100 or $1,000 from the merit-based pool. But first of all, Ivy League institutions do not have merit-based aid,
right?
So you can't negotiate an increase in merit aid. And the other thing to realize is that in many ways, students are a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
One student is in many ways very much like another. And yes, your student may be a talented musician, but there are lots of talented musicians. Or another way of demonstrating this is there are 80,000 valedictorians and salutatorians each year.
Mm-hmm.
So just because you were ranked first or second in your class isn't necessarily enough to distinguish you, especially at the more selective colleges. Even having a perfect SAT or ACT test score, there are thousands of students each year who achieve this. That may not distinguish you enough. And rumor is that Harvard could admit a class entirely of perfect SAT scores and still have students left over. So from the college's point of view, they're going to be looking for more than just academic talent. In fact, the academic talent will just be, are you capable of graduating from the school? And then they're looking for, what are your hobbies and your talents, and depth mattering more than breadth in terms of having you stand out. And so if your student has good grades, that's not enough to try to show the college that they should go all out in trying to give you merit aid. Now, if you're an Olympic athlete, maybe that does make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just your typical high school graduate who has great grades and one or two hobbies but nothing outstanding, that's going to be a harder sell than a student who is unique in some manner.
I'm really glad you brought this up, because a lot of times what you're inferring, if not explicitly saying, is sometimes it isn't just the numbers, because schools do engage in preferential packaging sometimes. If they want somebody more than somebody else, certain schools, it will make a difference with whether they go to bat for you based on how highly they ranked you or how badly they need what you're bringing to the table. And I guess you don't know that until you try, right? And so it makes sense to try if you fit the categories that we're describing that make good cases for a special circumstance appeal.
Right. And a lot depends on the specific needs of the school. And some schools may need a new oboe player, and so they may admit 3 of them.
Yeah.
Whereas other schools, they have a glut of those oboe players and they don't need any more. So you may just have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time in terms of your specific talents.
Yeah, and it could be a new major they're opening up. They have a new data science degree. You're indicating an interest in that. It's an undersubscribed major. They're thinking about shutting down some of their linguistics department or a particular language, and you indicate interest in that. You know, could be a male in nursing or a woman in computer science, and that's low. And so that's where you don't necessarily
or
know.
Or a male in library science.
There you go. That's another good one.
Right. And there are majors that are disproportionately one gender or another. And if you happen to be of the opposite gender, that may make you more attractive to the school. And in some cases, they may even have special scholarships available to encourage students of the opposite gender to enroll in that specific field. So it's worth looking around on the college's website, asking the financial aid office or the admissions office if they have any special awards, if your interests are a little bit unusual. And you may not get it for a male in nursing, but you might get it for a female student in mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
A lot depends on the individual college and their particular recruiting goals. And keep in mind that financial aid, in a way, is how a college recruits low-income students. So if it really makes a difference in your ability to pay, they may be willing to adjust that financial aid package if they have complete information about what makes it more difficult for you to be able to afford to enroll in the college. I once had a student who was living at home, and this was causing lots of problems academically because they were sharing a room with a sibling, and they really didn't have a quiet study area. And so the college was willing to make a change to allow them to live on campus where they would have a more accommodating atmosphere for their academics. But a lot depends on your individual special circumstances. What sets you apart?
And friends, after Dave does the preview for 109, you're going to want to stay around for an in-depth college spotlight on the University of Oklahoma.
Next week in the news, Preparing to Poach by Lila Burke, Inside Higher Ed. Anika and Mark will discuss why do the financial aid awards I receive vary so much from college to college in our book chapter discussion. Our question from a listener comes from Kirby in Colorado, and she wants to know, how can we avoid picking a college that will make our son turn into a jerk? Mark, we will be in part 3 of his interview with financial expert Mark Kantrowitz on the subject of how and when should you appeal for more money if your financial aid award doesn't meet your needs. And the college spotlight will go to Florida for the first time to look at Rollins College.
Okay, friends, I had a fantastic meeting with C. Don Bradley a couple months ago. Very passionate and persuasive guy who has an interesting story. Started out as a high school student in D.C. He went to the University of Oklahoma, and 34 years later, he is still there. And Oklahoma's an interesting place to me. When I lived in Dallas, I used to travel to Oklahoma quite frequently. And what I remember most about Oklahoma is how rich the American Indian culture is there. And you can see that reflected in the university. So it was founded in 1890, and it had existed as part of the Oklahoma Territory, which was near the Indian Territory. And for 17 years, it was in this state until the two merged and became the state of Oklahoma. And so it existed 17 years before technically Oklahoma was its own state. And before then, it was known as Norman Territorial University. And then, of course, there was a name change after it became a state to the University of Oklahoma. It is the flagship school for the state. We've done some other flagships college spotlights. We did one at the University of Kentucky. I did a college spotlight interview, in effect, with their dean of admissions on the University of Virginia. And we've got some more flagship interviews coming up later in 2020 and 21. So a little bit about Norman. Norman, Oklahoma is a population of 122,000 people, which makes it the third largest city in the state of Oklahoma. And it is located 20 miles south of downtown Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City's actually got a population of 650,000. And University of Oklahoma is 2 hours from Dallas, Texas, which is the 9th largest city in the country. So it's not in the middle of nowhere. Once again, in a city of 122,000, just in the outskirts of another one, 650,000, and 2 hours away from Dallas, which is getting close to 1.5 million people. So some more interesting things about the university. And one thing that will surprise people, but University of Oklahoma ranks first per capita among all public universities in the nation in the number of national merit scholars that it has. And in fact, it's second only to Harvard among all universities in terms of the most national merit scholars. Does that surprise you, Dave?
That is very surprising. Why is that?
Well, one of the reasons is they have generous financial aid awards. So some of your more highly selective private schools, like Yale, where your daughter's at, and Stanford, and lots of other schools, quite honestly, they really don't give you anything for being a national merit. But there are certain schools, Alabama's another one, that have really courted national merit scholars aggressively with financial incentives. So basically, to answer succinctly, aggressive merit aid and recruitment. But as you'll hear later as we go through this spotlight, they have some incredible programs that will make that national merit scholar type of kid regard them as a first choice institution. So we'll get into that in a second. They've got some absolutely stupendous programs. So some more things about the university. It's 50-50 male-female, which is actually quite rare these days. For a flagship school, it's actually on the smaller side, 22,000 undergrads and about 6,000 grad students. That may seem large, but it's actually really not large for a flagship school. Well, I'll tell you where it's not small, though, and that is the campus. Campus is huge. We're talking about a 4,000-acre campus, so that's definitely on the large side. The college spotlight we're looking at next week, the campus is under 100 acres, just to put things in perspective. We'll be looking at Rollins College next week. So this campus also has very distinct architecture. You can even see the Indian history there. It's got this very unique Cherokee Gothic style of architecture. If you like sports, big-time sports scene with the Oklahoma Sooners being a perennial power, especially a football power, definitely would be in the top 5 most historical football programs in the country, consistently make it to the playoffs, and their rivalry with the University of Texas is historic. It's one of these places where if you want the big football scene with all the rah-rah and the school spirit, then you got it in plentiful doses. Now, friends, you know Dave calls me a weather weenie. And guess what? And I don't even attempt to repudiate that. I am guilty as charged, and I would be in trouble at the University of Oklahoma because Dave This place will give Chicago a run for its money when it comes for the wind. That wind comes flying across that plains, and it may be 30 outside, but the wind chill is 10. So it's freezing with the wind chill factor.
That's surprising.
For those of you who are tougher than me.
Isn't it 2 hours from Dallas?
It is surprising because it's only 2 hours from Dallas. Yeah, and Dallas can be on the hot side. Yeah. But, you can look at Phoenix, really, really hot, go 2 hours north of Phoenix and look at Flagstaff. I remember, Norm, my brother Norm, Dave knows Norm, of course, real well, but you guys don't. My brother Norm got married in Phoenix, and then we took a trip to Flagstaff when we were at his wedding. Yeah. And it was a 70-degree drop in the temperature going from Phoenix to Flagstaff. Yeah, 2 hours away. So, sometimes it's like that. So some more things about Oklahoma. 56% of the students come from Oklahoma, and they have aggressively recruited Texas with a lot of big financial incentives. And so another 28% of the students are coming from Texas, which makes sense because it's such a large state and it's so close. So 84% of students are coming from Oklahoma or Texas, 4% internationally, and then the other 12% are coming from the other 48 states. 32% of students live on campus. Freshmen are required to live on campus. When it comes to scholarships, the school can be quite aggressive. They do have automatic scholarships that you don't even have to apply to that are based strictly off GPA and test scores, but they also have some other pretty generous scholarships in addition to the national merit. One of their more desirable ones is their community leadership scholarship. And for a flagship school, they have surprisingly small classes. Flagships tend to have large classes. 82% of the classes at OU are 39 or less. As far as the type of student that they attract, one thing I hate to do is give median profiles, because as soon as I think to give you a median, you'll think that's a cutoff, and that's not true. So while the median GPA is a 3.63, I want to kind of break it down for you a little bit more so you can see the distribution. 43% of students are coming in with a 3.75 or higher, 26% a 3.5 or higher. So about 70% of kids have a 3.5 or higher, 17% a 3.25 to a 3.49, 11% a 3 to a 3.24, and 3% under a 3. And we call those 3%, Dave. Starts with an A. You want to take a guess?
3% starts with an A. I'm not sure.
I hate to say this, but athletes.
That's right. All right. That makes sense.
I mean, listen, I don't want to reinforce the stereotype that all athletes, the whole dumb jock thing. There's a lot of schools, the graduation rate and the GPA for athletes is even higher than the average student, but not when it comes to football players. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And actually, we were just talking about graduation rates, and one of the sad truths is that for many of these schools, the graduation rates in the football program is quite horrendous. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and some of that is because they're exploited too, because it's literally a 40-hour-a-week job, and a lot of times if you've got a conflict between school and sports, it's like, sorry, it's literally like you're here to play football.
That's right.
From the coach's perspective. So that's not all on the athletes.
And getting a couple concussions on the way.
Yeah, exactly. So you know what? One thing, friends, you're going to have to get used to is some doctor commentary. It just comes with the turf. Dave works on health all day. He's working on the body. So he's going to have a lot of this medical insight. And guess what, Dave? I love it. So keep it coming. As far as the testing profile, 25% of kids have 700 or higher on the SAT, 41% 6 to 700, 30% in the 500s, and just a very, very few have under in the 400s. As far as ACT, 23% 30 to 36, 50% 24 to 29, 27% 18 to 23, and nobody really under that, except they're less than 1%. As far as the sorority fraternities, pretty big sorority school. 1 in 3 students are in sororities. Between 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 are in fraternities. And as far as the racial demographics of Oklahoma, we're talking 63.6% white, 8.7% multiracial, 10% Hispanic Latino, 5% black, 6.6% Asian, 4% international. And one of the things that I'll say, though, and this is one of the reasons why I think it's absolutely preposterous to try to rank schools overall, to put the whole sauce together, is because certain schools, may not roll off the top of your tongue when you think of, quote unquote, the best schools, but they may be the very best in the country when it comes to a particular major. And I can't think of a better example of that than Oklahoma, Dave. They have many majors where they arguably, and sometimes it's not even arguably, and sometimes they're the consensus for having the top program in the country. And as you guys know, I'm a lot more comfortable with, I'm going to get into that. I know you're going to say, what majors, Dave, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And, I'm a lot more comfortable with ranking schools by top majors. The only thing is that still doesn't mean you should go. It still has to be right for you. Like I would die. I'm a weather weenie. But I think you can sometimes say this school is definitively has the strongest program per major. So I'll go over some of the majors where they're stellar, and then I'll get into ones where they're just creme de la creme. So they have an unbelievable journalism program, one of the absolute top in the country when it comes to journalism, no question about it. They have unbelievable engineering programs. Engineering overall would be definitely a strength for the school. And they're strong in your traditional engineerings. For example, chemical engineering, very strong. Mechanical engineering, electrical, very strong. Biomedical, exceptional. But they're also strong in some unique types of engineering that you don't see on a lot of campuses, like aerospace and architectural engineering. There are actually not that many architectural engineering schools. I know when I'm working with a student that's interested in that, their options can be quite limited. But where they are arguably the top program in the country is petroleum engineering. And, I know Texas A&M would be one that would want to be in that conversation as well. But their petroleum engineering program is, creme de la creme. And another area where they're top-notch, absolutely top-notch, is geology. Anything to do with that, geology, geophysics, earth science, they can compete with anybody in the country. A very strong program would be kinesiology and exercise science. Another very strong program is sports management. Zoology is very strong. Organizational behavior strong. Entrepreneurship strong. Another program where they can compete with anybody in the country is their Native American Studies program, which, would make some sense, right, with the history. Oh, another program where they're definitely regarded as top 3, and some would make the case number 1 even, is their ballet program. It's actually their hardest program to get into, their dance. I'm actually working with a student this year, Dave.
Wow.
That trying hard to get into this program, and it's just really, really, really competitive. I mean, you got to do the audition, you got to do it in person to be competitive, and it's just incredibly competitive. They're really strong in other aspects of the arts as well. It's like things like music, theater, film, studio art, music. They're very strong there as well. And then the one program that I don't think really anybody could really challenge them for being the top program in the country is their meteorology program. I mean, it's just, anyone heard of the National Weather Center? Heard of that, Dave?
Absolutely. Yes, I have.
Did you know it was located on their campus?
I did not. That is very impressive.
Yeah. So, and there's other things too. So they got the National Weather Center, which houses just a unique collection of university, state, federal, and private sector organizations that all work together to understand, the unique events related to the Earth's atmosphere, which you can understand why geology and geophysics and all that is strong, right? So it all kind of somewhat related. But that's the good news. If you want to be a meteorologist, that's the place to go. But here's the bad news. Any idea what the bad news would be, Dave?
Well, you've already mentioned the weather, so I'm thinking it might be weather-related.
But that's a good guess. Guess what? Bingo, bingo, bingo. We got a winter chicken dinner. So here's the bad news. Norman lies within Tornado Alley.
That's right.
A geographic region where the tornado activity is particularly frequent and intense. Oklahoma City metropolitan area, including Norman, is the most tornado-prone area, not in Oklahoma, not in the Southwest, not in the U.S., in the world. So you got to take a chance that you don't end your life there. But, we haven't had that many people die there, but still, just expect some tremors there. It's tornado central. But in addition to that, if you want to be a meteorologist, the Storm Predictive Center, known as the SPC, it's a branch of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's also located right in Norman. And the Storm Prediction Center, they forecast severe storm, tornado outbreaks nationwide. In addition to that, research is also conducted at the National Severe Storms Laboratory, the NSSL,
which has whole field research and operation all there. So you'd have to say that'd be their very top program. But when you look at dance and when you look at petroleum engineering and you look at some of their other programs, they can hang with anybody. So I think this is one of the reasons why you can see, Dave, why I feel so passionate about consensus rankings. Like if you want to be a dance major or a geologist or a petroleum engineer or a meteorologist, like it's as good as it gets.
Yes, you've made that point many times. And I think that's fascinating when you look at Oklahoma, because I must admit my impressions of it was fueled more by football, Brian Bosworth, and its history. And I would have never guessed that it was a dance center. I would have guessed maybe it's weather and it's Native American studies, but I did not know that it was a powerhouse in engineering. So those are impressive.
Definitely.
And it does go to prove that when you look at these comprehensive rankings, they do these institutions injustice because they do not focus on these areas of specialties that are quite surprising when you look at the names of these institutions and realize that these strengths are not well advertised. So.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another thing that's really strong is their innovative and supportive living and learning communities. So we've talked before about these LLCs. In fact, I even used LLC as one of my admissions vernacular words. This is where you live together with a cohort of people who are interested in studying what you're interested in studying. And so you come right in and it's like a built-in affinity group by majors residentially. And they're also a real leader when it comes to innovation and support of living and learning communities. So, and lastly, I'll say that their zoology. Oh, I think I said that already. Their zoology program is really strong. So, Dave, tell me one thing you learned.
Well, I learned several things. I sort of knew that Oklahoma was in tornadoity, so the weather part of it was not surprising, although that is the number one tornado center. I thought that was Kansas, but sorry, Dorothy. But the dance was fascinating. The fact that it would be a powerhouse in engineering shouldn't be surprising because it's a flagship school.
Right.
But once again, I think one of the sad things is that so often downside of athletics is it often obscures the real strengths of these schools. And if you were to tell me that it was a powerhouse in engineering, I would not have known that, especially given how much I know about Oklahoma.
Well, you dated yourself with your Brian Bosworth. You dated yourself with your Brian Bosworth there, Dave, especially when they had the number one player in the NFL that went number one in the draft, their quarterback, and they had back-to-back Heisman winners.
Who's the number one quarterback?
What's his name? Dave, it's Kyler Murray.
That's right. Kyler Murray. That's right. And who was the name of that?
Yeah, he got the Heisman 2018 from Oklahoma. And the very year before, Baker Mayfield got it in 2017. So they had coming up, back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners. So you're giving me Brian Bosworth going back 30 years, man.
Showing our age, the Boz.
Yeah, I think you have to be at least 45 and maybe even 50 to know that and be a football fan. Sam Bradford, by the way, also won it in 2008. So yeah, and then Jason White in 2003. So they're quite and then really want to show your age, Dave. Billy Sims, 1978. Let's going back there. But anyway, I think I know another thing that surprised you was the national merit for them being the number one of all public schools, second only to Harvard for the most national merits. And this is something I want our listeners to know, because if you've got a child who's an extremely strong standardized tester, and if money is really important to you, then Oklahoma is quite generous with the money they throw at national merit scholars.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Vasaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Tauha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru, and marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.